I am very excited to have another Botany Bistro session to kick off our new year. And we are going to be starting it off right with a session here today about Paleobotany. But before I do that, let me just welcome all of you and thank you for joining me this afternoon. My name's Mary Dudley, and I'm the Ecology Education Manager at the Civic Garden Center. We are located in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we've been around since 1942 in the Avondale neighborhood. So if you're local to Cincinnati and you want to swing by, please pay us a visit. It's, a beautiful January day. There's not a lot blooming out right now, but there's always something to see on the property and the grounds, and we'd be happy to show you around. I am excited about this series. We started this in May, and I just really am glad that we're able to share botanical knowledge with all of you free of charge. We really want to educate people about how to use plants in their lives to become stronger, healthier, more resilient. And this information that we share has benefited me in my career for a long time. And so being able to share it with all of you is really wonderful. At the end of the lecture portion, I will turn on the chat. So you're all welcome to save questions for me, and we can discuss those at the end. So we do have a live session every other Friday. And we'll be continuing our Paleobotany chat on January 26th at noon, which will be our 17th, our 18th. This is the 17th session that we've had so far. So that's really awesome. And we will always post all of our videos on YouTube. So you're more than welcome to catch up if you're just joining us, or if you have a couple favorites that you like to review. Really just trying to share the info, get people excited about plants in new ways, and build this community together. So a recap of some of the sessions that we've had before include plant breeding and genetics, which we just wrapped up in 2023, plant pathology, physiology, systematics and taxonomy, plant anatomy, morphology. Those are a few of the sessions we've had in the past. We've had a couple of guests join us as well. I don't have a guest today, it's just me. But it's really neat to kind of open up this field of botany and discover things that we didn't know about before. Botany is a very wide discipline. And so I realized that when I started my advanced degree at Miami University in Ohio, just all the different pieces to it. And, there's so much to explore and discover. I never get bored with it. So, this is a wonderful way for me to explore other areas of botany that I might not be so closely intertwined with my current day-to-day activities. And today's no exception. I am not a paleobotanist. I am a trained botanist, but most of my work involves living plants and teaching people, sharing this information. So I'm really glad that we can find a new topic for us to dig into today. No pun intended, but we will talk about digging today. So today we're going to talk about paleobotany, what it is, kind of the different ways plants can be preserved, how these fossils indicate past climates and environments. And then at the end, we'll discuss what are known as living fossils. So you might have heard that term before, so we're going to break that down for you today. We always like to share something for lunch, so I hope all of you are having a nice, healthy lunch. Today I have some Italian beef soup. It smells so good. And usually our lunch relates to something in the talk, so there will be a time where I kind of bring this back up and say, oh, okay, this is how my lunch relates to this. We've got all these different delicious pieces in here. I'm not chewing on any fossils right now, but there's lots of different things to discover in this soup. It smells so good. And so you also have encouragement during the weeks that we have off to share something with us on social media. I really like to keep this fresh and kind of build this community. And so our homework, if you would like to do it, is to tell us about your favorite fossil. You can share that with us on our social media pages and tag us at Civic Garden if you're on Facebook. So please think about doing that. But I'm kind of giving away some of my talk, so I'm gonna just get into it. So that if you didn't know what paleobotany is, maybe you have a couple clues already by now. But paleobotany is the study of ancient plants. All right, it's not a new fad diet, and it's not concerned with fossilized bones. We are thinking about plants, and so I think that in the world of paleontology, those dinosaurs are the superstars. My son has already decided that he's going to work at a museum, hopefully in New York. He's 6. He's got all these plans, and he wants to dig up dinosaur fossils. And so I think that that's really exciting. And a plant person like me, I can go out there and dig up some plant fossils. So these fossils are found in sedimentary rocks. And there's different ways these can be preserved, but typically they're impressions or compressions of the plants that are left on rocks' surfaces. Also, there's petrified objects, which we'll discuss a little bit later, such as wood, that preserves the plant material in rock-like form. And there's also things called coal balls found near coal deposits that have specimens in them. Lots of different ways that we can find ancient plants in our habitats. The field of paleobotany has unearthed a wealth of information about the evolutionary history of plants and their interactions with the changing environment. And so as we try to piece together these stages of plant life forms, such as gymnosperms, angiosperms, ferns, things like that. We're like, when did they start to produce flowers? When did plants become more dominant on the land versus in water? These fossils can give us clues to that. So from a few of paleobotanists, I'm kind of tripping over that word, sorry. A few of them that I have heard from will call themselves time travelers, or they'll have this concept of being able to go back in a time machine by looking at these different sedimentary layers of rock, cracking them open, and discovering amazing fossilized remains of plants and the clues that they give to the habitats that they once lived in. And so we're going to continue to, explore new things. Paleobotany is a live and well, thriving field. And every time, you're driving through maybe a clearing like that has, between those two rock walls, and you're going down the road and you're seeing all these different layers of rock, there are people out there that are trained to be able to identify exactly what colors align to which times and different eras. It was just really fascinating. I do have a passion for geology, and I love to gather gems and beautiful rocks. And so there is a fossil park pretty close to us here. It's called Trammell Fossil Park in Sharonville, Ohio. And so we're thinking about a little field trip there. So we'll stay tuned if you want to go over there and check out some fossils. And so the fossils that paleobotanists look at are leaves, stems, seeds, roots, and pollen grains typically. They can be macroscopic or they could be very large, just depending on what they're searching for. And so they're able to reconstruct entire ecosystems from different geological time periods based on this data that they discover. They use techniques such as radiometric dating to determine the age of these fossilized plant specimens. And that's how they're able to kind of give a range. They're not going to give you necessarily usually an exact year. I mean, we're talking millions of years ago. So there is a range when they find these plants, and they can say, oh, this was from the Jurassic era, the Triassic era, or Cretaceous. They're able to kind of identify which layer that they're in. And it's been pretty neat to do some of the research on this. They use microscopic examinations, CT scans, chemical analysis, scanning electron microscopy. I mean, a lot of different techniques to be able to look very closely at these specimens that they find. And sometimes, one trip to a fossil bed will result in decades of lab work after that. There are researchers that are still studying things that were collected 40, 50 years ago, and you want to make sure they're looking at every single part of this, little fossilized fruits and seeds and pollen grains. I mean, just think about how small pollen grains are. We can't usually see them with our naked eye. Some are larger and maybe give us that little fluff on our nose if we're really getting in there to smell a lily or something like that. But those are a lot of pollen grains together. Those are not individual grains. And so thinking about how tiny these things are, and looking at all these rocks, maybe thinking that there's nothing going on here. And then when you put it under a scanning electron microscope, you can see, oh my gosh, look at all the detail that I'm finding. So it's important to be able to consider the type of preservation of these plant fossils in the analysis. So paleobotanists are going to be trained not only in plant identification, because you need to know the morphological characteristics of the plant that you are studying, looking at the edges of the leaf. Is it serrated? Is it smooth? Understanding if you're looking at just a part of a leaf, or is this the bark, or is this a leaf scar? So paleobotanists really need to be very well trained in plant identification and also geology, and the way that those rock formations have been preserved over time. And then they need to understand how that plant fossil was preserved, so that they understand where it is occurring in geological time. So you can have mineralization, carbonization, you can have compressions, like I mentioned before. And so these are the most commonly found type of plant fossil. And what happens usually is that the leaves will fall, for example, in a lake area. And so the leaves will fall from the plants just during, temperate changes, or, maybe a big windstorm drops these leaves. They float onto the surface of water in a lake bed, and maybe they then sink to the bottom. And so at the bottom of this lake bed, there's less oxygen, there's kind of sediment that it's floating into, and then maybe there's a landslide or some kind of avalanche. Some of that sediment buries those layers of leaves, and then over time they get compressed and compressed and compressed, and then you can unearth these chunks of rock. You can split them open with a knife, and you'll see actual leaves. So this is a really exciting project that's going on in an area called the Clarkia fossil bed formation. And so you're actually able to split open, it looks like these chunks of clay that reveal 15 million year old actual leaves. So not just like an impression, but the actual leaf itself. And then they have now methods of being able to remove the leaf from the rock, separate it out from the rock, and then they can press it in between protective sheets, so that we could actually just hold a leaf that was photosynthesizing just 15 million years ago. It's pretty exciting. Now there's not an existing body of water there, because it was there a long time ago, and our Earth changes. And so thinking about how we're seeing plants in the fossil record compared to what we're seeing today, there's a huge story to tell there. There are a lot of gaps that need to be filled in, and that's the work of many people collaborating together, many different types of scientists. You can also get these molds or casts that will preserve some fossils. I have a couple of fossilized plants here that my coworker Kayla brought in, and she had on her desk. I was like, oh my gosh, can I show these during the bistro? So she found these in Illinois, and so this was a little flat rock that she split, and then when she split, she found this beautiful impression of this leaf. It's really just gorgeous. It's dark, and you can see, and I know it will be hard for you guys to see on my computer, but you can actually see the veins in the leaf. It preserved very, very well. You would be able to measure this. You can see the midrib, you can see the edge of the leaf. So being able to identify that leaf would be possible based on all of this detail that they have. This is also a really neat one. Looks like a maybe fern frond, but just amazing, intricate detail that has been preserved over time of these plant specimens. And so maybe I'll find some at the fossil park in the coming weeks. So we've talked a little bit about different types of work that paleobotanists do, but I would like to talk about petrified wood. I lived in Colorado for a while, and there was a beautiful rock shop that I loved going to in Nederland. So I lived in Boulder. We would drive to Nederland often because they also had a wonderful Indian restaurant that I really liked. And we would stop at this rock shop, and I had to stop myself from spending all of my paycheck all the time. So there was this piece of petrified wood that looked like it had been tie-dyed. I mean, it was bright, it was vivid, it was large, it was, at least as big as my face. It was $300, and at the time, just getting out of grad school, that was not on the options to be able to get it. But it's one of those things that I've never forgotten how beautiful that piece of rock was. And I was like, wait, is it rock? Is it wood? What is happening here? It's petrified wood. I was like, I don't know. I don't get it. So let's break this down, and we'll think about what petrified wood is. My parents also had a piece of petrified wood that we kept on a shelf for a long time that they had gathered on one of their travels, and so I'm really excited to kind of start my own collection. But it is a fossil. It forms when plant material is buried by sediment and protected from decay because it doesn't have access to oxygen or little microorganisms that are chewing on it. So when it gets buried by this sediment, it's going to be eliminating the oxygen and the other microorganisms that are there. And then this groundwater, which is rich in dissolved solids, flows through the sediment that the plant material is in, and it replaces the original plant material with silica, calcite, pyrite, or another inorganic material such as opal. The result is this fossil of original woody material that you can see very intricate details. You can see the grain pattern, you can see the xylem and the phloem, you can see the bark. And so it's not actually plant material anymore, right? So it has been replaced by these inorganic materials. So they are rocks. They just were formed along the same cellular structures as the plant. And so it does look very much, like a plant. It looks like a trunk of a tree just sitting there. But if you would try to pick it up, it would weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds because it is a rock. And so I think that is really fascinating. Some of these petrified pieces of wood can be found in the Petrified Forest National Park, which is in northeastern Arizona. And about 225 million years ago, this area was a lowland space with tropical climate and was covered by a dense forest. Rivers flooded by tropical rainstorms washed mud and other sediments into these lowlands, and then these huge coniferous trees, 9 feet in diameter, 200 feet tall, lived and died in the area. And then volcanic ash blanketed the area with a high silica content. And so that's how you're seeing these processes happen, things that were happening hundreds of millions of years ago. Now, you can't collect what you see in the park. If you want to get petrified wood, you'll need to find a retailer, or you can possibly go and collect on private land with permission. But in the park, you are not allowed to do that. So if you decide to go and visit. And so I think that the concept of petrified wood, this kind of more delicate, fragile piece that is able to be preserved in that way, it fascinates me, obviously. I'm very excited about it. The other thing that I found really interesting are the identification of these pollen grains. So if you look at pollen grain images under an electron microscope, you will see amazing amounts of detail, and the bumps on the surface of the pollen grain, the way that it is shaped, the size of it. Sometimes there's a crease in the middle, and sometimes it's folded in on itself. Pollen grains are really kind of like a fingerprint for plants. And so they're unique to the plant that they came from. And it's pretty amazing that you can identify plants just from their pollen grains. And the other thing that makes them really useful in paleobotany is the fact that they are very strong structures. So pollen grains, I'm not going to say they're indestructible because nothing is necessarily indestructible, but they can withstand a lot. They can withstand pressure, they can withstand heat. They have this very hardy exterior. And so it's made of highly resilient substance known as sporopollenin, and it gives pollen grains the ability to withstand extreme weathering and be preserved for very long expanses of time. So without this exterior, the grain would dry out and disintegrate because they are so small, but this exterior helps preserve them, and so we're able to find those in the fossil record. And so they would be collected in samples. They would then, the scientists can use chemicals to kind of dissolve away the rock around the pollen grain, and the pollen grain a lot of times will survive that chemical separation. And so they're able to then look at them very closely under the microscope and see these intricate patterns on the pollen grains. Most of these morphological characteristics for pollen grains have remained consistent since they first evolved. And that can be said for most reproductive structures on plants because they just tend to be more uniform and predictable. And so a lot of plant identification can be relied on for reproductive structures. So if you are bringing in a leaf to someone, it's harder to identify than if you brought in a flower and a fruit, because those things technically are more uniform, typically are more uniform. When you bring in a leaf, okay, if it's a shady area, that leaf is going to be larger and darker typically than it would be if it was in a very sunny area. And so it can be hard to tell when you don't have the reproductive structures. So pollen kind of fits right in there with being able to hold on to those characteristics over many generations, over a long period of time. And so paleobotanists observe physical characteristics of fossil pollen and compare them with pollen of modern day plants. And then similarities can tell them if that plant that was found in the fossil record is closely related to a plant that we might have today, or if they belong to the same family. And many plants will only grow in certain conditions, right? So I live here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I really enjoy my trips to Florida. I really like to go visit tropical countries and just look at all the biodiversity. It's amazing to see the different palms and some of the really neat fruits, mangoes and tamarind, things like that. I can't really grow those here unless I have a microclimate or greenhouse. Just because I know that the humidity, the temperature, especially on a day like today, is not going to be friendly to some of those species. And so understanding the environmental requirements of these species is going to give us some more information about what that area used to be like millions of years ago in the past. And so in 2013, this is kind of a fun little tidbit here, the discovery of a 240 million year old fossilized pollen grain in Switzerland kind of flipped the script on when they thought flowering plants had appeared in the timeline. And so this pushed it 100 million years earlier than previously thought. So there's lots of people working on different areas and different finds and kind of sorting through all these rocks and trying to find all these fossils and line them up. But some discoveries like this, you're like, oh my gosh, like this totally redefines what we previously thought about the evolution of flowering plants. So I thought that was pretty neat, this little tiny pollen grain. Who knew? And so it's also helped scientists fill in critical gaps in knowledge relating to certain plant families, especially as they, were when all of the land masses were closer together. And so how they kind of broke up. It's important to note how those plants were arranged. And so the plants that we see today, some of them had to adapt by moving north or south to avoid glaciation. There were changes in the amount of humidity and different temperature swings. And so all of these signatures are left behind. These stories are left behind in these rocks. And so being able to kind of travel to the past and hear those stories, see those stories come to life through paleobotany, I think is, entertaining, if not fascinating. Another example of fossilized pollen grains belonging to the plants of the Asteraceae family. These are your sunflowers and daisies, things like that, were found preserved in Antarctica. And so these pollen grains showed that plants belonging to this family were there as far back as the Cretaceous period, 76 to 66 million years ago, when dinosaurs roamed. Hopefully they weren't stepping on too many daisies, but there were Asteraceae plants on the planet at that time. And in Antarctica, which right now I'm not so sure if you'd be able to find very many flowers in parts of Antarctica, and it's quite isolated now, and it was not always that way. There are a few other ways that paleobotanists can reconstruct past climates, and these cues and clues are found in the fossil record. So thinking about what some of these megafauna were eating at the time. Okay, what did dinosaurs eat? What are these plant and animal interactions? So that's paleoecology. Which is another field that we won't get into today, but if you're getting excited, you could wet your whistle with a little research into paleoecology as well. So let's talk about living fossils, all right? So this is kind of a coin term that is interesting, not always 100% accurate. It's like kind of I'm a botanist, I would call a cucumber a fruit. Some people might call it a vegetable, but it's just kind of layman terms. So a living fossil is a representative of a species that has been on this planet for a very long time. And so use the name cautiously around certain scientific groups because I don't want anybody to get side eye or whatever. But it is something that people have heard of. So let's kind of find out what this is. These are plants that retain morphological characteristics that are nearly identical to their ancient counterparts found in the fossil record. They give us a link to the past and offer insights on the adaptability of plant lines. And so we're going to start off by talking about ginkgo. Ginkgo is a beautiful tree. We have several of them here at the Civic Garden Center. It's a dioecious plant, which means that there are separate male and female plants. If you see a ginkgo, you would probably recognize it by its characteristic fan-shaped leaf. And in the fall, I find these to be one of the most beautiful trees we have. There's a street in my neighborhood that's lined with ginkgos, and the bright yellows of these leaves in the fall before they fall to the ground are just so impressive. And really, it's neat to see all of the trees on the street essentially change color and lose their leaves within hours of each other. And so this very ancient species of ginkgo has been found in rocks of the Permian age about 280 million years old. So it's been around for a while. It's doing its thing. Most of the trees that you'll see are probably males, which means that they are not producing fruit. If you have a female ginkgo in your neighborhood or in close proximity to your home or workplace, you will know because they produce very odoriferous fruits. I would say that the odor resembles stinky cheese. I love good cheese. I don't mind stinky cheese. but it's very strong odor, and they create these little fruits that are about the size of a grape, and they're typically orange, little reddish orange. You can eat them; they are delicious. You have to peel that flesh off. I've had someone else prepare them for me and found them to be very tasty. They taste kind of like a mix between a tapioca ball and a gummy bear, something like that. But they, very, very tasty after they've been roasted. And they have a lot of good vitamins in them too. So in the geologic past, ginkgo biloba was widespread and very abundant, and dinosaurs, we think, definitely munched on this one. Their fossil species of ginkgo, Adiantoides, is really indistinguishable from the modern ginkgo biloba, but they are slightly different. So the next time you see a ginkgo, give it a big hug and say, "Thanks for sticking it out. You're doing a great job." Cycads are also on this list of living fossils. So I worked in Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden for a few years after graduate school, and they had an amazing cycad collection. So cycads, they kind of look a little bit like palms, but they're not palms. But they have kind of a leaf that has many leaflets, and they're typically very thick. And then they have this kind of trunk that can be hairy or not. But it's a very sturdy plant. It's got real thick leaves, and it doesn't grow very fast typically. It creates cones. So if you need to look up a picture of a cycad, it's spelled Cycads. And so you can look that up. And they have also a lineage dating back to the Permian period, and they have survived mass extinctions and climate fluctuations. And so it's really neat to see a bunch of them together and think, that back in the Permian when there was more carbon dioxide available in the atmosphere, these plants were huge. So pretty exciting to still see representatives of them today. Another one is Metasequoia, the dawn redwood, which Metasequoia glypostroboides, was rediscovered in the mid-20th century. So dawn redwood is a conifer that sheds its leaves each year. So it is not like the other coast redwood or the giant sequoia that does not do that. And once known only from fossils and thought to be extinct, in the 1940s, the trees were rediscovered in a remote valley of central China. And so it was something that, this isn't just in the fossil record, and then all of a sudden we find a living representative of it on a planet that seems just to be inhabited everywhere by people, and the population growing steadily. It's really neat to think that there might still be pockets and places that we have not explored yet. And so for all the adventurers out there, there's still lots of space for you to continue to explore. And now the collaborative efforts of Chinese and American scientists have been able to plant seeds from these trees that were discovered, and now you can readily get these plants in the horticultural trade. So it's a pretty neat story of being able to bring this back. The last thing I wanted to mention was just the complexity of the task of a paleobotanist, right? So I've already talked about how they need to be well-versed in many different aspects of science. They need to be a plant identifier. They need to understand the geology of a space. They need to then be able to take all this data and come up with some kind of coherent analysis of it. And so they're looking at ecological data, spatial data, developmental data, and phylogenetic data. And they're putting all of that together, and they're coming up with some general broad conclusions about how the area in which they're studying looked millions of years ago. And so I know that if I do go to the fossil park not far from here, we're going to find a lot of marine fossils because that's what was happening here at that time. And so we were in an ocean. And so we have little pieces of coral that we can find. We have little, snail shells and things like that we can discover. That's amazing that our habitats have changed so much. And in the current conditions of how we're predicting our climate to change, this research becomes very important because it can give us a glimpse into what the world was like when we were experiencing warmer temperatures and different fluctuations in atmospheric conditions. And so I think that this work is very, very relevant. And I hope that anyone that's listening that is curious about paleobotany will go ahead and try to pursue that a little bit. And we should all be grateful to the work of these folks who spend a lot of time looking into a microscope and chiseling away at rocks.